So, Buck, good. It's good for us to reconnect again today. And I think the discussion that we had last week and the feedback that we received was quite positive. We
Okay.
spoke about the security and the compliance challenges for credit unions in our last discussion. And although the feedback was positive, this discussion last week really just provided a framework or an overview with regards to the compliance and risk that credit unions face, especially in the threat of cyber security, cyber attacks that we know that are increasing. But I think today we can just kind of go down just a little bit deeper, kind of going through more detailed information about the compliance aspect that credit unions face. So for example, you mentioned last time about the NCUA 748 regulation and how it can help credit unions kind of tailor their compliance efforts. I think it's going to be important, just kind of mention by definition, just what is the NCUA? What does it stand for? Why is this regulation, why is this so important with regards to what credit unions need to do? Then we can talk about that, just the lift that's involved so that, again, that the risk is mitigated for their members and ultimately, the whole community is going to be enhanced as a result of following through on this, as far as improving their compliance and understanding and addressing this regulation. So what are your thoughts, Bob?
Sure. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you. So let's get going because this is so critical.
Right.
See, NCUA, the National Credit Union Administration. So this is a body created by the government. And, like you've got FFIEC for the big banks or the banking sector in general. Then you've got Bank Secrecy Act. And then you've got, very, very different regulations and rules that apply generally to the banking and insurance sector. So credit unions specifically have to comply with the regulations made by this body called NCUA, National Credit Union Administration. So, there is this whole Title 12 and, ECFR government regulations. That's a big thing. But out of that, specifically Part 748 is what the banks, the credit unions and the small, especially the small and mid-sized should focus on, because this will, by and large, get them 60, 70, 80% compliant. So if there is any query from NCUA, they will look reasonably good just by complying with this one single paragraph or part of the act. So I'll talk a little more about that, but feel free to interject with any questions or any comments that you have received from our last chat, and I can always try to answer them also. So 748 in a nutshell, Wayne, the seriousness, okay? So if I remember correctly, every credit union, federally insured credit union, is required to have a written security program as demanded by this particular section within 90 days of effective date of insurance. Now, federal insurance has been made available to credit unions for now, 70 years? And the regulation is that within 90 days, you are required to have it. So as soon as this 748 came in place, in 90 days, every credit union was supposed to have one. To be honest, many don't yet have it. Small pieces here and there. But what I want to emphasize today, Wayne, to all your audience from credit union segment, is that complying with 748 is not actually very hard. But it gets harder because you try to comply in bits and pieces. Let me do something here because auditor had a finding. Let me do something else there because auditor had a query. That makes it harder. If you look at 748 as a whole, it's not all that complex. And one important thing to keep in mind, that the regulators are very, very cognizant of the size and complexity of the credit union when they come to look at things, when they demand some documentation. So it's not that, a 2-branch credit union needs to write 748 in as much detail as, let us say, Navy Federal has to write.
That's interesting. But, you've mentioned with the aspects of this, but, but from a credit union's perspective, is this something that they are aware of? Do you think that some are not aware of it? And if so, from an education standpoint, what do you think the risk is, and how can credit unions become more involved to know what this regulation is, assuming the fact that some may not be fully aware or they may not necessarily know what to do?
They are aware in terms, because they keep receiving letters all the time from NCUA and other bodies in the federal government. But what has happened is 748. If I go to a board of directors meeting of a credit union and ask directors, how many of you have complied with 748?
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I'll not get much response. It will be a blank stare most of the time. So that is where we are in terms of what happens on the ground. But sometimes the funny problem, Wayne, is that they are complying with some pieces of that, but they are not aware of the nomenclature. They are not aware that this is part 748 of the regulation. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
So let us go through, at least the high level
Sure.
content of the security program. So what is the government asking for? And you can see that it is nothing unusual, nothing crazy, pretty straightforward. So there are, most of the issues are pertaining to, the information technology and member data security, but there are some aspects about the physical security as well. Like,
Okay.
how do you protect your property from robberies and burglaries? And how do you have CCTV working to make sure that every activity in the office premises during non-business hours is recorded so that you can show it to law enforcement authorities if something were to happen. So those are the kind of things most credit unions, even absolutely small single branch ones, do have pretty good CCTV coverage today. You walk into any one of them, it is there. So not a real problem today. But look at 2-3 other things. Let us say, how do you preserve member records? For how long do you preserve? And when it is time to destroy them, how do you destroy? Do you have evidence that you have actually destroyed those records? Now you can imagine, when you have spent a lot of time in this industry yourself, it's very hard to, show in a concrete term what exactly has happened. Do you know what your member records are, where they are, in which system they are? Do you know how long, how many years you are going to keep it? And do you know when to destroy and how to destroy? And do you have proof that you have actually destroyed? Now, this is one very, very simple question, Wayne, but I think you can see where I'm going with this. It is very hard to give a very clear-cut answer to this question unless you have got a good written program in place.
Right.
And that is the importance of 748. I love this, actually, I'm telling you. The second important area, obviously, is, okay, let me take a step back. Everything in this section, Wayne, is about the security and confidentiality of member records. That's all the law is concerned with. Okay, so now anything that can happen in your credit union that poses a threat to the security and confidentiality of member records, this law is going to ask for evidence that you know what happens and you know how to take care of it. Like you saw, do you have cameras and CCTV, so that if somebody were to break into your bank and actually steal your computers or paper records or whatever, that is one type of risk. The other type of risk is you don't know how and when to destroy your records, member records, let us say after 7 years, after 10 years. And if you don't know that, then you just keep them forever. And you know this, Wayne, that if you have got a 90-year-old credit union today in the country, or any bank for that matter, they have tucked their paper records of all the 90 years somewhere in the basement of many of their branches. That's the reality. Now, the law absolutely does not need them, but keeping them there continues to add to the exposure that you are suffering from the risk of. So when to destroy? And then another important thing I'll add is what 748 specifically asks. Do you know what kind of risks exist in your environment that can pose a threat to the security and confidentiality of member data? So like, this starts right from your property. Are you in a flood zone? Where are you keeping your records? Are they in the basement? Is it likely that someday the basement can get flooded and you lose all the records? Where are your computer systems? So it can, the auditor can literally go into anything, because all of these questions are important for the security of your member information.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
there's nothing to be afraid of,
Mhm.
but there is a big scope of things. And honestly, Wayne, you tell me, if you were to tell me
Mhm.
that, Buck, I'm giving you a box of jewelry. I don't care where you keep it in your house. I don't know where you keep it, how you keep it. But 10, 15, 20 years from today, when I want it back, I want you to give it back to me in a safe and sound manner. If this is the condition, what will I have to do? Everything that I will have to do, the same thing is what is asked for in section 748.
No, this is quite interesting. So my perspective, Buck, is assuming the fact that today the credit unions are aware of this and they know what to do, because obviously things change, right? So keeping up with the updates is going to be really important. I'm thinking that one of the value propositions that we could do is to, from an education standpoint, maybe put together a webinar so we can have credit union representatives to on board so they can ask questions. They may have questions relating to the regulation, what they may need to do in a very specific and concrete way. So I'm thinking an outgrowth of this discussion is taking it to the next step, right? And we will invite our members to ask questions of what they need to do about this regulation, because obviously there are risks. In our concluding point, the few minutes that we have left, say, for example, that a credit union has not gotten involved in what they need to do from a requirements perspective, right, for this regulation. What's the risk for them?
The risk is what we spoke right at the beginning, that they are supposed to have a security program, written security program within 90 days of getting federal insurance for the credit union.
Right. So say they don't. Say they don't have that, it's not put together, it's not in a final format. What is their risk?
I mean, absolutely worst case, government can rescind their insurance, which means basically they cease to exist.
Okay. So what we're talking about is very important. And I think from the opportunity that we're sharing this information so that we can help mobilize, organize, and bring this to center plate for credit unions.
Absolutely. In fact, I can show them some, reports that I help various banking customers prepare. Like, if there is a suspicious activity in your bank, money laundering kind of thing, you feel there is a suspicion that you have about some of your transactions, you feel some of your employees may be in collision, then you are supposed to file a suspicious activity report with your regulator. So I can walk you through some samples, if people need any help, I'm more than happy to show it to them.
Right, right. So I'm thinking in our next discussion that we should talk very specific aspects about what we talked about, the framework, we talked about what the regulation includes, but then we should talk about what credit unions need to do to make sure that they're in compliance with this regulation and stay in compliant. Because one thing about regulations is that they're updated, they edit, they change. But if a credit union is not consistently involved or aware, or they don't have this regulation center plate, then there's a risk that they have, not only for their members, as well as they're continuing to exist. Exactly. I think one of the things that we want to think about is how that we can help credit unions to be aware specifically of what they need to do. And I think an education session would be very helpful. We're going to let our network kind of respond back on this, but I'm really thinking that would be a very strong move for moving forward of how we can mobilize credit unions to be aware of how we can help them.
If you want to collect some questions, we can curate them and give them a very specific, examples and any help that we can offer. Okay. In fact, another good thing, Wayne, is to go back to the basics and essentially start maintaining a diary by one of the board members as to what is due when. And they say that, hey, every day this has to happen, every Monday this has to happen, every first of the month this has to happen, every end of the month this has to happen. And if they just keep asking questions on that frequency all the time, that itself builds a very good compliance culture. And I can help them with that. I've got some tools that I have developed and I can show it to them.
Excellent. I'm thinking, and again, these conversations that we have are free flowing, and through this discussion, it becomes clearer and clearer to me that there is an opportunity to help credit unions to understand what's necessary with very tangible aspects so that they can mitigate their risk and provide continued value to their members. So maybe we'll continue that for our next discussion. And again, we look forward to those in our network, especially the credit unions and others, to kind of provide their feedback based on what we just talked about today. So we're going to look forward to the next time.
748. I live with those three numbers. 748.
Okay, very good. But we look forward to the next time that we